Today's episode is actually a flip of the ladies episode that we had a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So the ladies episode that we had for ladies night was called Submit by Example. And so we were dealing with the first part of that, wives, husbands in Ephesians 5, where wives submit to your husbands. And we dealt with the first part of that. And just talking about how big of a role submission plays in our households, in our churches, and in our communities. Eventually, it reaches across the world. Whether there is submission or a lack of submission, it plays a big role in everyday life. And so I wanted to flip that for us guys that are here tonight. All three of us are married. And I'm going to tell you this right now. We don't have any type of perfect marriage. Like, if you're looking for perfect, step by step, this is how you do it, universal marriage, that ain't us.
You're on the wrong podcast.
Yeah, right. That ain't us.
Maybe focus on the family or something like that. But
I might have to go to Luke Walker and them on the Wrath and Grace.
Right.
No, but that ain't us, man. So we're going to give you our personal examples, like our personal things that we've witnessed and what the scripture tells us. Yeah. That's the best that we can give you. And it's sufficient.
Yeah.
It's sufficient.
Right.
So tonight's episode is called Love by Example. A couple episodes we talked to the women about submitting by example. So tonight, husbands, men, we're going to learn how to love by example. We're going to talk about what that means. Let me tell you like this, okay? From the very beginning, God intended marriage to be a depiction of the gospel.
Yeah.
All right.
From the very beginning, God gave marriage as a way to illustrate what was to come.
Right.
What was already planned out from the beginning, which is Jesus coming and dying for us. He already planned that out, already had done that, established that, and said, I'm going to give man and woman to each other so that they can understand in a greater light what love really looks like.
Yeah.
So he gave us marriage. And through the years, we found ways to abuse our positions in marriage.
Right.
We found ways to distort marriage. We found ways to totally desecrate it.
Redefine it even.
Redefine it.
Yeah.
And I thought this was a good quote. This is from Mary Cassian. She said, God created manhood, womanhood, marriage, and sex because he wanted us to have symbols, images, and language powerful enough to convey the idea of who he is and what a relationship with him is all about.
Wow.
Without them, we'd have a tough time understanding concepts such as desire, love, commitment, fidelity, loyalty, unity, intimacy, oneness, covenant, fatherhood, and even family. So he gave us marriage to help us understand God and the gospel.
All right.
I like that.
Yeah.
You can quote her on that. That was really good, though. And I thought that was worth sharing. Los and Gordon, feel free to answer this one at a time.
Okay.
What's your view on love in the context of marriage, and how does it differ from your previous understanding of it?
All right.
We'll be right back with a message from our sponsors.
Right. Yeah. View on love and marriage. Well, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but I think love sometimes, of course, the perversion of love is sometimes when people think of emotion,
right,
and they think of things that need to happen for love to happen. So I don't think love is dependent or contingent on things that we think are important.
Okay.
Because prior to that, love was really, prior to Christ, love was almost dependent on a certain vibe or experience.
Right.
And that's what the world does.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I remember L's song, I Need Love, and he talked about, you know what I'm saying?
Love.
Yeah, you remember that joint?
Yeah, I remember that.
I need love.
And the thing about when that joint came out, like, it was just dope to see an MC actually soften it up, you know what I'm saying, and talk about love the way he did.
Right.
But, it's secular, it's worldly. It has that mentality to it where love is contingent on experience or an individual. But Christian love is not dependent on those things.
Absolutely.
And so it's set apart. So that's how I think it's different. There's an eternal foundation to Christian love.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
For me, love has it's changed. My perspective of love has changed, definitely because of the scriptures.
Right.
Christ being our example is one way of saying that, but then looking at especially the early stages of our marriage,
right,
it really wasn't love. It was self-interest, self-serving. It was conditional.
Right.
Comparing that to Christ's example of love, that's how I started getting a bigger, broader, more refined definition of love. So if I had to sum it up for myself, it's multifaceted, but if I had to sum it up, it would be love seeks the highest good of someone else. Even if that means we don't need to be in a relationship, because that's not the highest good for you. Like, that's not the best thing for you right now. So yeah, I start there, seeking the highest good. So when me and my wife look backwards, we're like, that wasn't the best. That wasn't an example of love. It wasn't sacrificial. It wasn't none of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Let's talk about Christ the husband and how Christ sets the example for us as men of God and husbands on how to deal with all the other struggles that we deal with in marriage.
Yeah.
So I think, Los, you wanted to start by defining love and submission.
Yeah, I think it's important. Simply put, submission is to put before, you know, in a nutshell. And, there's a couple passages on it. Romans 8:7, for instance, for the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit, put before, to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Romans 10:3, for being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. And then going to Ephesians 5, where we're pretty much getting this, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. So there's a putting before that needs to take place, and mind you, it's in light of what Christ has done.
Right.
So you have to define submission to what Christ has done, and he put the will of the Father before his own. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what submission is.
Right.
Love is to have a strong love for a person and their good as understood by God's moral character.
Gotcha.
Especially characterized by a willing forfeiture of rights or privileges in another person's behalf. It's going to what you're saying.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And of course, Ephesians 2:4. But I wanted to point out Ephesians 5:1 and 2, because I think this sets up the tone for the passage and really the standard. Ephesians 5:1 says, therefore be imitators of God.
That's right.
Right? And so to imitate God in our submission and our love, well, we have to look at the gospel and what Christ has done. Really the triune God, the Trinitarian example of submission and love, how they love each other.
Right.
How the Son submitted to the Father. You know what I'm saying? And how the Holy Spirit submissive to the Son. So you see love and submission in the triune God. And I think the big thing is that, love, like I said earlier, is not contingent on, at least Christian love isn't contingent on the temporal, but love is decisional. It's not dependent on emotion, on temporal things. It's actually a decision you can make.
Right.
To put the good of someone else before your own, like you said.
Right.
So, yeah, I would say that, that's what it is.
That's good. That's good. That's
Right.
definitely good right there.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that. Is there anything you want to say on that?
I agree.
Okay.
It's a choice.
All right.
It's a decision. It's a choice.
I mean, it's nice when you're feeling it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I would say if you're not feeling it often, something's wrong.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying emotion isn't important,
No.
but there are those seasons where you're not feeling it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where you have to remember the gospel and remember the standard of truth. Right?
That's right.
So, yeah.
So now that we've talked about that, the definitions and really clarifying what we mean by submission and love, Los, did you want to talk a little bit on, and I loved how you talked about it on Sunday, John the Baptist viewing Jesus as the husband.
Yeah.
Because I think that gives us a good background too on what to look forward to in our own marriages.
Yeah, along with Ephesians 5, John the Baptist recognized Christ and his incarnation as the bridegroom. In John 3:27-30, he says, John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. So even John, like from the gate, knew that Christ came for his bride.
Right.
And then you go back where God sent his son, and he gave his son, but he, we can say he sent the bridegroom to get his bride, which is the church. You know what I'm saying? So he's the example for the husband.
Yeah.
Exactly what Gordon said. Christ is the example on how to love our wives.
Yeah.
But we need to look to Christ.
Right.
And again, all these books that are being written on the temporal, man, it's sad to see people just fall into just temporal fixes,
Right.
and not really fixate on the eternal things that actually deals with the temporal issues that we find in marriage. Because we think that sometimes a Christian can make the mistake of, I need to fix this thing. Well, I think the example helps us to deal with it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because we're going to have lifelong issues with our wives.
Absolutely. Say that again, bro.
Right.
Say that again.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's,
Right.
Yeah.
And I think laying down our lives for our wives plays a huge factor in all of this.
Right.
Obviously, the literal laying down of our lives, but I think it's also in everyday life.
Right.
Yeah.
Laying down our desires, our personal desires, our personal wants,
Yeah.
our personal preferences
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
for the sake of our wife.
Yeah.
That's a loving thing to do, because most of the times men and women are totally opposite on the things that they want.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're laying down what we want for our wife, most likely we're laying down something that we want for something that we probably don't want.
we're both, biologically and just nature, we're wired in a different way.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to say, yeah, of course I'll take a bullet for my wife. I'll lay my life down physically, but I won't die to saying something that hurts her feelings when we get in an argument.
Yeah.
Like it's, we can take that big route out.
Right. It might be easier taking a bullet than not taking a stand on certain
or shooting
things.
bullets verbally.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm guilty of that.
Right.
Christ as our example, he didn't just die for the church, he died to save them. Like there was a purpose for it.
Yeah.
To rescue us.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a purpose for it. Yeah, I'll die for my wife, or or because of my wife. That's not the tone I got from reading that. What can I die to that gives her life?
Yeah.
Now, some of my attitudes, like you said, some of my preferences, how I was raised, because we did it like this. How I view women, because for most of us, you weren't the only one I was with, so I'm bringing some of that into the picture.
You bring a good perspective into this. How did you used to view women?
Well, I was, I guess, groomed in Christianity. Some good, some not so good. Some healthy, some not so healthy.
Okay.
So for us, we got married when we were young. So for me, it was my wife. She didn't come to faith yet. She didn't care what I was.
She was just ride or die.
Her perspective of love was somebody's actually being nice to me, holding the door open, that type of thing.
Right.
I knew a little bit better, but so for me, my perspective was marriage was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do.
Because you were raised in a religious background, right?
Yeah. So that was marriage is like that's the pinnacle of your relationship. If you're dating someone, it's to get married. Because that puts a smile on God's face, and but conversations about marriage, the role of the husband and wife, that never happened. It almost didn't have to happen. You got married, you're cool, and then everybody kind of backed off because you're married now.
Yeah.
And no even walking with you while you're in your marriage, like no, that's just the beginning. You still need that same community,
if not more, right?
Way more, right? Way more. So.
I think we talked about that before, where you were like, why are so many people there when you get married? And where are those same people
when you are married? It's like, no, that's their business now. But no, it took years to realize. It took conviction of the Spirit. It took understanding scriptures that our marriage is just a small little pixel in a big picture that's pointing to Christ and His relationship with the church.
Yeah,
it gives your marriage purpose when you when you bowled for 10,000 times and you seen movies. It gives it purpose. It's bigger than us.
And like I was saying earlier, God has always intended marriage to reflect gospel realities.
Right.
Yeah.